What if I told you that a single person was able to completely transform, right down to its very foundations, an entire nation's approach to warfare and tactics? It sounds like fiction, but it's a proven historical fact. Are you ready to learn right now the shocking truth about the ingenious combat maneuvers that allowed him to win large-scale battles against a vastly superior enemy with virtually no casualties? While celebrated generals sent thousands of soldiers into the meat grinder, a legendary Apache chief named Huca created a completely unique, unrivaled system for commanding troops across the most treacherous, rugged terrain. This man literally forced nature itself to fight on his side. He transformed lifeless desert canyons, scorching sands, and sheer cliffs into a completely impassable, deadly trap for any enemy, even the best-equipped one. Enemy soldiers were driven mad, unable to figure out where the next attack was coming from. But what was his main secret? Be sure to watch this video all the way to the very last second. Today we'll break down, piece by piece, the strategy that modern military experts still admire to this day. You'll learn how the intricate deployment of troops, cleverly camouflaged reserve positions, and the Huca's stunning, ahead-of-its-time system of secret signals allowed his warriors to completely dominate any terrain. We'll reveal one tactical maneuver that forced heavily armed units to retreat in panic before a handful of Native Americans. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the Apache's entirely different approach to conserving their strength. Chief Huca considered his primary objective not to be open combat, but to completely wear down the enemy through maneuvering. Every warrior in his unit knew his position even before any movement began. Huca's leadership was based on a strict calculation of distance and the time it took for small groups to advance. His strategy for deploying troops was radically different from the familiar linear formations of the 19th century. The secret lay in creating autonomous units of 3 or 4 trained men. Such small groups could move freely across difficult terrain without losing speed. Huca deployed these units in a fan formation, covering vast areas while remaining hidden from the enemy's view. Each group had a clearly defined sector of control and a route for a rapid retreat. This decentralization made the formation flexible and completely unpredictable to outsiders. A visual range distance was always maintained between the groups. This allowed them to instantly reorganize their formations when the enemy changed direction. The warriors occupied high ground, leaving the lowlands completely unoccupied. From above, they could observe their opponent's every move while remaining unnoticed among the rocks. This deployment deprived the enemy of the ability to exploit its numerical superiority. Not a single warrior stood in the open. Huca demanded that every crevice or thicket be used to conceal their silhouettes. The distance between cover points was calculated so that men could quickly change positions. Movements were made exclusively on the command of the senior member of each small group. This approach prevented chaotic movements and maintained strict order on the ground. The first line of units always served as a lookout. They relayed information about the stranger's advance to the other groups in the rear. The second line was deployed in a semicircle, creating an invisible barrier in the opponent's path. The third line served as a rallying point for rapid regrouping of forces. This multi-tiered deployment structure ensured reliable control over the entire territory. Huca himself was positioned at the highest point of the chosen area. From there, he coordinated the shifting of the lines depending on the enemy's actions. His location was known only to the senior commanders of the small groups. This protected the leader from sudden detection by search parties. The leader's secure isolation ensured uninterrupted command of the entire maneuver. If the first line was detected, it would retreat instantly. The warriors would disappear among the rocks, luring the enemy deeper into the territory. There, a second, denser line of cover already awaited the intruders. This method of sequential entanglement disrupted the opponent's orderly ranks. They stretched out for kilometers, losing contact with one another. The Huca's deployment even took into account the direction of the wind and the position of the sun. The warriors positioned themselves so that the sun would shine directly into the enemy's eyes, blinding them. The wind was meant to carry the dust from their skirmishes away from their main positions. These subtle calculations gave them an undeniable advantage during prolonged maneuvering. Nature became part of a carefully planned tactical formation. Opponents spent hours trying to determine the exact number of Apaches. Groups scattered across the slopes created the illusion of a massive concentration of forces. The echoes from their movements among the rocks amplified this disorienting effect. The fan-shaped formation prevented the enemy from delivering a concentrated strike at a single point. Any attempt at an offensive fizzled out into nothingness. Huka proved the effectiveness of his unique tactics for deploying troops. His units operated as a single organism, requiring no unnecessary commands. This approach allowed the warriors to conserve their energy for decisive actions. I'm curious to know how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Do you agree with Huka's arguments? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to our channel. What if everything you've been taught about reserves is outdated? Huka used reserve positions not for passive waiting, but for active pressure. Reserve groups were positioned behind natural barriers deep in the rear. This allowed them to instantly assess the situation and move into the necessary sector. Such points were prepared long before the enemy appeared on the horizon. The main reserve position was always located near a hidden water source. This allowed the warriors to regain their strength after a long march. Huka personally checked the supplies at each such hideout. The locations were chosen in hard-to-reach places, hidden by dense thickets or rocks. The enemy would pass by without even suspecting the presence of dozens of people. Movement from the reserve to the front line took place along pre-established trails. These routes were cleared of dry branches to eliminate any noise. The soldiers moved in single file, concealing the actual number of troops being deployed. In rocky areas, they stepped only on solid rocks. This made it impossible to track the approaches of the reinforcements. The reserves were divided into two independent units for greater mobility. One unit was designated to reinforce the flanks in the event of an encirclement attempt. The other unit remained deep in the rear to secure retreat routes. This structure of the reserve positions gave Huka flexibility in decision-making. He could respond to any unforeseen changes in the situation. The reserve troops were always on full alert, ready to move out. They did not light fires and maintained absolute silence. Communication with them was maintained through special messengers who knew the terrain. These messengers relayed information using pre-arranged signs and symbols. The reserve's response time was a matter of minutes after receiving a signal. If the enemy began to retreat, the reserve transformed into a pursuit force. They moved out to cut off the retreating strangers, blocking narrow mountain passes. Huka used fresh forces for the final phase of the entire maneuver. The exhausted enemy faced well-rested warriors brimming with energy. In the event of an unfavorable turn of events, the reserve covered the main force's retreat. They occupied commanding heights and held back the invaders' advance. This gave the front line time to safely blend into the landscape. The reserve positions became insurmountable defensive lines along the enemy's route. The skillful use of reserve forces saved countless lives. Huka never deployed all his reserves at once. He always kept a small group on standby for emergencies, just in case. This last line of defense was positioned on the most inaccessible cliffs. Their task was to observe the overall course of the maneuvers from a distance. 9 times out of 10, this final reserve never even left its positions. Setting up positions required a deep understanding of the psychology of outsiders. Huka knew that army patrols avoided steep slopes and deep canyons. That was precisely where he placed his most secure hideouts. Nature itself protected the resting warriors from unwanted encounters. The reserves became an invisible shield for the entire Apache detachment. As a result, the skillful use of reserves ensured complete tactical superiority. Huka's warriors always appeared exactly where they were least expected. This created the illusion of vast numbers and the omnipresence of his forces. Do you agree with how brilliantly Huka utilized these hidden resources? Keep reading until the next chapter to learn how his use of the terrain turned the cliffs into the chief's primary weapon. What we found in the old archives turns our understanding of camouflage on its head. For Huka's units, every boulder became a tool for tactical superiority on the ground. The chief personally studied the topography before assigning areas of responsibility. He chose narrow canyons where outsiders' maneuverability was reduced to zero. The Apaches, on the other hand, moved along the rocky ledges smoothly and completely silently. The deserts and mountains posed a severe challenge for army expeditions. Soldiers lost their bearings among the identical hills and endless sands. The Apaches used these mirages and the monotony of the terrain to their advantage. They lured patrols into the labyrinths of dried-up riverbeds. There, their opponents quickly exhausted their water supplies and lost their strength. The rocky terrain left no clear footprints from the warriors' boots. Huka trained his men to move only on hard, rocky surfaces. A 20-man unit could cross the plateau without leaving a single footprint. This made the work of the Army's trackers a complete waste of time. Their pursuers circled the same spot for hours, searching for clues. Caves and crevices served as natural storage areas for provisions. The temperature inside the rocks remained stable, even in the most intense heat. This made it possible to preserve food and water for many weeks. Huca marked hundreds of such shelters on his internal map. Each one could provide a detachment with everything necessary for a forced march. Narrow passes were used to split large enemy forces into smaller units. A large detachment was physically unable to pass through a gorge in a single formation. They would stretch out in a thin line, losing visual contact between units. At that moment, the Apaches would begin to apply targeted pressure on the rearguard units. The landscape itself imposed unfavorable conditions for the enemy's advance. Sunlight in the canyons cast deep, contrasting shadows. The Huka warriors moved exclusively in these dark areas, blending in with the rocks. Army patrols, blinded by the bright light, simply failed to notice the silhouettes of the Apaches. Their camouflage was based on a perfect understanding of the interplay of light and shadow. A person became indistinguishable from the surface of the scorching rock. Winds sweeping across the wastelands whipped up thick clouds of dust. Huka used these dust storms to secretly move large forces. Under the cover of the dust cloud, warriors could pass within 100 meters of a patrol. The sound of the wind drowned out any footsteps or the occasional rustling of rocks. The inclement weather always worked in favor of the indigenous people of these lands. Steep cliffs served as reliable protection for the unit's rear positions. Not a single soldier could climb a sheer wall unnoticed. The Apaches stationed only a minimal number of lookouts in these areas. This freed up personnel for more critical areas of territorial control. The terrain functioned as an impregnable fortress wall. The desert vegetation was also actively used to conceal movements. Prickly shrubs and low-growing trees distorted the perspective for observers. Warriors used branches to create false cover and divert attention. Opponents wasted hours scrutinizing completely empty thickets. Meanwhile, Huka's detachment quietly moved dozens of kilometers away. Nature served not merely as a backdrop, but as a key player in the maneuvers. Huka transformed the harsh wastelands into a reliable shield for his men. His knowledge of the landscape compensated for any difference in the opponent's technical equipment. This unique tactic deserves the highest praise from modern researchers. Please like this video if you too are impressed by the warrior's ingenuity. The secret, for which people pay thousands, lies in ancient methods of communication. Huka implemented an extremely complex system of visual signals using mirrors. The reflected beam allowed information to be transmitted over distances of up to 15 kilometers. Each sequence of flashes signaled a specific maneuver or direction of retreat. This silent form of communication prevented the enemy from intercepting their plans. In cloudy weather, the mirrors were replaced by a system of directed smoke from campfires. The fires were lit in deep pits to conceal the flames themselves. The smoke was released in bursts, using a wet blanket covering the pit. Long and short columns of smoke formed a unique message code. This language was understood only by the senior group commanders in the know. Sounds from the surrounding natural environment were used for short-range communication. The warriors masterfully imitated the cries of desert birds and the rustling of the wind. Each sound had its own precise meaning within the Huka tactical scheme. A simple whistle could signal an order to immediately change positions. Outsiders perceived these signals as the ordinary sounds of the wilderness. Special attention was paid to stone markers along the secret trails. Several stones stacked in a pyramid indicated the direction of a safe retreat. A boulder moved to the side warned of a patrol in the next section. This static system of signals operated autonomously and around the clock. Any warrior could decipher the message without making direct contact. At night, sparks from flint were used to transmit short commands. One spark meant stop. Two sparks signaled run. This dim light was invisible from a distance but perfectly discernible to those nearby. Nighttime coordination demanded the utmost concentration from every member of the unit. Huka had honed this skill to absolute perfection through long hours of training. Special runners duplicated the visual signals in conditions of poor visibility. They moved along the shortest routes known only to them. Their physical endurance allowed them to cover 50 kilometers a day. The runners delivered Huka's orders personally to the commanders of small groups. This ensured reliable command and control, even during severe dust storms. The signaling system was constantly changing to confuse the enemy's observers. What had meant a call to assemble yesterday might become an alarm signal today. Huca personally approved new codes before every large-scale maneuver. This prevented opponents from deciphering the logic behind the Apache's actions. This intellectual superiority ensured the safety of the entire tribe. Training and visual signaling began long before participating in campaigns. Every warrior had to be able to recognize the signals without error, in any situation. A single person's mistake could lead to the failure of an entire carefully planned maneuver. Huka strictly tested his men's knowledge before leaving camp. Discipline in the transmission of information was the foundation of the unit's survival. Signs were even left on tree bark and dry shrub branches. A snapped branch indicated the presence of a hidden water source nearby. A scratch on a rock indicated the number of strangers who had passed through there previously. The Apaches read their land like an open and understandable book. This wealth of information gave them a tremendous advantage in navigation. Thanks to this complex coding system, their units operated in perfect sync in any situation. The Huka signaling system was far ahead of many similar systems of the time. It provided an unmatched level of control over dozens of scattered groups. How difficult do you think it was to memorize all these combinations of signs? Keep reading until the next chapter to learn the secrets behind the Apache's flawless coordination of their movements. Coordination of actions was central to the Great Chief's tactical plans. Huka demanded that every participant have a complete understanding of their current role. Small groups operated as a single, seamless unit, without unnecessary commands or delays. The success of a maneuver depended on the warrior's ability to anticipate the actions of those around them. This invisible bond was forged over years of joint treks through the desert. Before each sortie, Huka gathered the commanders for a detailed discussion of the plan. A precise map of the terrain, indicating all landmarks, was drawn in the sand. Each commander repeated his route aloud to confirm his understanding. Questions were asked about alternate routes and emergency assembly points. Only after the plan had been fully understood would the unit begin its covert advance. The timing of their movements was synchronized based on the sun's position in the sky. The groups were required to reach designated checkpoints at strictly defined times. If Group 1 fell behind, the others would halt their advance. This prevented the formation from breaking up and left the flanks exposed. Punctuality in the desert was a matter of preserving the integrity of the entire formation. Huka implemented the principle of mutual responsibility within small, autonomous combat units. Each warrior bore personal responsibility for the safety of his comrades. If someone fell behind due to fatigue, the entire group adjusted its pace. This strengthened trust among the members and prevented panic in difficult situations. The unit's cohesion made it virtually invulnerable to external pressure. Coordination also included resource management during the march. Water and provisions were distributed evenly among all participants in the maneuver. When one group's supplies ran low, neighboring units shared their reserves. This process took place at hidden assembly points at night. Mutual assistance allowed them to maintain high mobility for weeks on end. Navigating the canyons required exceptional precision in coordinating movements. Groups moving along the tops of the cliffs guided the detachments advancing along the canyon floor. They dropped small pebbles to mark a safe path around patrols. The detachments below placed complete trust in the eyes of their comrades on the high ground. This three-dimensional interaction shattered all stereotypes of linear control. Position changes occurred using a rolling rotation principle, with one unit covering the other. While two warriors were moving, two others closely monitored the perimeter. Then they switched roles, ensuring continuous control over the terrain. This method prevented the enemy from suddenly appearing in an unguarded area. Huka perfected the rolling deployment technique through grueling training. When a large unit was divided, temporary deputies to the leader were appointed. They had full authority to make decisions within their sector. Huka trusted their experience and did not interfere with local command. Delegating responsibility increased the flexibility of the entire coordination system. Each commander could adapt the overall plan to the changing situation. A special skill was required to coordinate actions during a dust storm. Visibility dropped to 2 meters, and visual signals became useless. At such moments, the warriors used physical contact via long straps. They moved in a chain, orienting themselves by the tension of the leather straps. This method allowed them to maintain formation even in the densest sandstorm. The cohesion of the ranks was achieved through long practical training sessions in harsh terrain. Huka personally tested the ability of small groups to coordinate in the dark. As a result, Every soldier could sense the rhythm of the entire large unit's movement. Flawless coordination became the hallmark of this outstanding leader's strategy. It provided a tremendous advantage when organizing the most complex, multi-stage maneuvers. The experiment that did not go according to plan for the enemy involved their attempts at pursuit. Huca developed a phenomenal strategy for instantly withdrawing from the active phase of combat. His warriors never retreated in a large group along a single route. They vanished into thin air, scattering in 10 different directions at once. Their opponents simply couldn't figure out which trail to follow. The signal to withdraw from the confrontation was given in advance, before their forces were exhausted. Huca believed that prolonging the engagement always played into the hands of a numerically superior enemy. On command, the warriors broke visual contact and retreated into deep crevices. They used pre-planned escape routes that the outsiders knew nothing about. The speed with which the detachment vanished astonished even the most experienced army officers. A small group of the most resilient men was always left behind to cover the retreat. They moved actively, creating the appearance that the main Apache forces were still present. This group drew attention to itself, while the rest retreated to safety. After 2 hours, the rear guard would also disperse, one by one, in different directions. The enemy was left alone in the empty, silent desert. During their retreat, the warriors used a technique to obscure their tracks in the sandy soil. They would walk several kilometers backward, returning toward the cliffs. Then they would make a huge leap onto solid rock, leaving no footprints. The enemy's trackers followed these deceptive routes into dead ends. Solving such puzzles took long hours of precious time. Escape routes were planned to intersect with riverbeds. The water perfectly concealed tracks and eliminated any scent of human presence. Warriors could wade knee-deep in water for several kilometers at a time. Patrols would lose the trail on the riverbank and have no idea which way to go next. This tactic was one of the most reliable in Chief Huki's arsenal. A rendezvous point 30 kilometers from the contact zone was designated after the group split up. The men made their way there individually or in pairs over the course of several days. Huca awaited everyone at a hidden base, checking the integrity of his unit. This method completely ruled out the possibility of being surrounded by large enemy forces. Splitting up the unit made it invulnerable to the enemy's massive maneuvers. During the withdrawal, the fighters strictly observed silence and camouflage. They did not open fire and ate only dry rations from caches. Movement took place primarily at night or at dusk. During the day, the men hid in the shade of the rocks, regaining their strength after the march. Such discipline ensured the safety of every individual along the route. Sometimes Huca used false retreat routes to mislead the enemy. Some warriors deliberately left clear tracks leading into a waterless desert. The enemy would rush in pursuit, depleting their water supplies under the scorching sun. The actual retreat took place in the opposite direction across rocky plateaus. The intruders trapped themselves in the snare of their own overconfidence. Speed was the key factor in successfully escaping the conflict zone. The warriors traveled light, leaving behind all unnecessary equipment. Human life was valued far above any material possessions. Huca taught his men to part with their belongings without the slightest hesitation. This lightness of load ensured the very mobility that saved entire units. This approach made pursuit a pointless and extremely exhausting endeavor for the enemy. The warriors returned to base refreshed, while the opponent was drained of their last reserves of strength. The exit from the maneuver was planned even more meticulously than its initial phase. Do you agree that the ability to withdraw at the right time is far more important than the skills of an open attack? Read on to the next chapter to learn about the main principle of Huka. Huca's greatest achievement was his philosophy of absolutely preserving his men. He considered it unacceptable to risk even a single man for the sake of a dubious tactical advantage. Any maneuver was called off if there was a threat of unforeseen complications or superior forces. The leader preferred long, grueling marches to direct, open confrontation. This set him apart from other leaders of the time. Before each campaign, Huca personally assessed the physical condition of every warrior. Those who were tired or had not fully recovered remained in the safe camp. Only those who were 100% ready were allowed to participate in complex maneuvers. This prevented the unit from being held up due to the weakness of individual members. The health of the tribe was at the top of the chief's list of priorities. All tactics were based on avoiding contact in open, exposed terrain. Huca knew that army weaponry had the advantage over long, open distances. Therefore, he forced the fighting exclusively into narrow gorges and dense thickets. There, The opponent's long-range fire became meaningless due to limited visibility. Close combat occurred only under conditions that were advantageous exclusively to the Apache warriors. To minimize risks, they actively employed the tactic of false encampments in camps. The warriors built primitive shelters and left bonfires burning overnight. They themselves would retreat several kilometers away and observe from the darkness. Enemy patrols wasted their energy, trying to capture completely empty territories. Huca gained time and space without the slightest threat to his men. The ability to know when to stop was the most important quality of small unit commanders. The thrill of the chase was strictly suppressed if it violated Huca's original plan. Disciplined reasoning was valued above the blind courage and bravery of individuals. Every step had to be carefully considered and logically justified. It was precisely this calculated approach that allowed the units to return home with a full complement of men. Knowledge of the properties of medicinal plants also played a huge role in preserving strength. The warriors knew how to quickly restore their energy using decoctions made from desert herbs. They knew how to relieve muscle fatigue after days of continuous marching. This knowledge was passed down by the elders and was mandatory for the youth to learn. Nature provided not only shelter, but also the means to sustain endurance. The use of camouflage suits made of dry grass rendered the warriors invisible. They could lie motionless for hours, just a few steps away from a passing column. The composure of these people astounded researchers studying their culture. They blended into the ground without making a single sound. This allowed them to gather intelligence without making dangerous visual contact. Particular attention was paid to psychological preparation for long periods of waiting in ambush. The warriors knew how to control their breathing, slowing their heart rate during moments of tension. They entered a state of deep concentration, shutting out unnecessary emotions. Fear and panic were unacceptable, as they could expose the entire group. A cool head was the primary shield for every participant in the operation. Huka instituted the practice of thoroughly analyzing every mission carried out in the desert. Upon their return, the commanders reported in detail on all shortcomings and mistakes. Every inaccuracy in the route or camouflage was thoroughly examined by the entire council. Past experience became a reliable foundation for future flawless operations. The refinement of tactics never stopped for a single day. Thanks to these measures, Huka earned a reputation as a brilliant and wise leader. His men entrusted their lives to him without the slightest doubt or hesitation. They knew that their leader would do everything possible to ensure their safe return. Minimizing risks became the foundation for his unit's success in harsh conditions. This approach proved to be historically sound. Providing small groups with everything they needed required exceptional ingenuity on the part of the organizers. Huka's warriors did not carry heavy sacks that would hinder their rapid movements. They created hidden caches of provisions along the routes of their future movements. These caches contained dried provisions that retained their quality for many months. This allowed the men to make forced marches of hundreds of kilometers without excess baggage. Water was the most valuable and strictly rationed resource in the desert. Huka knew the locations of all the hidden springs inaccessible to outsiders. Some springs were tiny depressions in the rocks that collected dew. The warriors cleaned them out and covered them with flat stones to shield them from the scorching sun. Access to water determined the entire logistics of the unit's movements across the territory. Food consisted mainly of a high-calorie mixture of dried meat and berries. This ration was light, compact, and quickly satisfied hunger. Each warrior carried a small leather pouch containing this ration on his belt. Eating it required no fire and no time spent on preparation. Meals were eaten on the move during short breaks. Equipment and footwear were repaired exclusively using natural materials found on hand. The warriors wore moccasins adapted for silent movement over rocks. The soles were reinforced with stiff leather resistant to sharp rock outcroppings. If worn out, the footwear was repaired using strong plant fibers. Their independence from supply bases made the units completely self-sufficient. Weapons were also kept as simple, lightweight, and low maintenance as possible. Bows were made from flexible types of wood found in the mountains. Unlike army rifles, they were not affected by sand or dust. Arrows could be remade during extended rest periods in cover. The reliability of their arsenal ensured the effectiveness of their maneuvers in all weather conditions. Resources within the unit were distributed according to strict principles of equality. No one was allowed to receive more water or food than his comrades. This maintained morale and strengthened the sense of internal unity. Huca personally ensured that these rules were followed during difficult treks. Fairness was the foundation of discipline among his men. The system of caches was constantly updated by special supply teams. They did not participate in the maneuvers, but were exclusively engaged in preparing the routes. These people gathered supplies and hid them in inconspicuous caves. Their work was unseen but critically important to the success of the entire tribe. Without reliable logistics, rapid marches would have been simply impossible. Navigation to the caches was guided by barely noticeable natural landmarks. A typical bend in a dry riverbed or a peculiar boulder served as reliable landmarks. The coordinates were passed down by word of mouth only to trusted commanders. This protected the resources from accidental discovery by outside desert explorers. Knowledge of the map of the hiding places was the elders' greatest treasure. During the winter, logistics were adapted to cope with low temperatures and snow. The soldiers wore insulated cloaks that did not restrict their movements in the cold. Supply caches were moved down into the valleys to prevent provisions from freezing. Moving through the snow required special skills to conceal their tracks. Huka took seasonal climate changes into account when planning all his maneuvers. A well-coordinated supply system allowed the Apaches to dominate vast expanses of territory. They felt confident in places where others were merely trying to survive. Huka's logistics represented the perfect adaptation of humans to the harshest conditions. It required no complex machinery or long supply trains. Self-sufficiency became the key to the tactical freedom of the entire indigenous people. Huka understood the importance of demoralizing the opponent long before visual contact was made. His warriors constantly created the illusion of their omnipresent, invisible presence. They left strange signs in places where they were least expected. The enemy was in a state of constant tension, waiting for the Apaches to appear. This invisible pressure severely drained the nervous systems of the patrol units. The use of sounds at night became a true art of disorientation. Warriors imitated the frightening cries of nocturnal animals around their opponent's camp. These sounds came from different directions, creating a sense of being completely surrounded. Deprived of normal sleep, people lost their ability to perceive reality accurately. By morning, such an exhausted detachment was utterly incapable of pursuit. Sometimes the Apaches deliberately left part of their equipment in plain sight. A found moccasin or a broken arrow would force their opponents to slow down. They would begin to search the area thoroughly, wasting precious hours. Huka used these delays to increase the distance between the detachments. The fear of the unknown worked better than any physical barrier. Huka's scouts often observed the enemy's movements from high cliffs. They did this so that their silhouettes would appear briefly against the sky. The strangers realized that their every step was being closely watched from above. The feeling of constant surveillance demoralized even the most disciplined officers. Nature itself became a vast theater of shadows and illusions. Masters of camouflage could approach a resting enemy detachment unnoticed. They would leave their mark right next to the tents and slip away just as quietly. In the morning, the discovery of such a trace caused genuine panic among the men. The realization that the Apaches could have acted but chose not to was even more frightening. This demonstrated Huka's absolute mastery of the situation. The chief actively used disinformation through false tracks and abandoned campsites. Patrols followed these tracks into the driest parts of the desert. They exhausted all their strength battling the heat, without finding a single person. Disappointment and exhaustion undermined faith in the success of the entire expedition. Huka controlled his opponent's routes as if he were moving pieces on a chessboard. Sudden appearances and instant disappearances took a psychological toll on the pursuers. An Apache detachment might appear on a hilltop and vanish into thin air. The soldiers would rush over, only to find empty, sun-baked rocks. This game of cat and mouse could go on for weeks without a break. The outsiders' patience ran out much faster than the endurance of the local warriors. The realization that the landscape was working against them weighed heavily on the army units. They could trust neither a single bush nor a single dark crevice in the canyon. Fear forced them to waste supplies on false targets. The constant anticipation of danger wore people down more than long marches. Huka turned this paranoia into his most effective strategic weapon. Discipline among the Apache ranks allowed them to remain calm in any situation. They did not succumb to provocations and strictly followed their plan. Their calmness contrasted with the nervous and chaotic actions of their opponents. This inner balance gave them a tremendous psychological advantage. Their will to win was based on a deep understanding of the laws of their land. The tactic of psychological pressure allowed them to win confrontations without physical contact. Their opponents simply gave up on further pursuit and turned back. They acknowledged their powerlessness in the face of an invisible and elusive adversary. Huca saved the lives of his men by prevailing through the power of intellect. This method became the gold standard for covert maneuvers in the history of conflict. Huca's tactical schemes are still studied in detail by modern researchers. His methods of decentralized command are recognized as incredibly effective in rugged terrain. He proved that intelligence and knowledge of nature triumph over technological superiority. His system of visual signals laid the foundation for understanding nonverbal coordination among groups. Huca has forever inscribed his name in the annals of the past greatest strategists. The ability to camouflage themselves and utilize the terrain has become a textbook example of survival. The principles established by the leader are striking in their logic and simplicity of execution. They were based on respect for the elements and a deep understanding of the desert ecosystem. Huca's people did not attempt to conquer nature. They became an integral part of it. This symbiosis provided them with incredible endurance and stealth. The idea of autonomous small groups has found its way into modern concepts. The division of roles and mutual responsibility ensured the high reliability of such units. The ability to act without constant orders from above increased their overall reaction speed. The flexibility of the Huca structures allowed them to adapt instantly to any surprises the terrain might present. This was a breakthrough in the organizational thinking of indigenous peoples. The philosophy of preserving the lives of warriors became the chief moral lesson of the chief. His refusal to take senseless risks for the sake of glory demonstrated his true wisdom. Huca judged the success of a maneuver solely by the number of people who returned home. This humanistic approach set him apart sharply from his era. His concern for every individual made him a legendary leader of his tribe. Logistical chains and a system of caches demonstrated the importance of meticulous planning. The success of any operation was laid out long before it actually began in the desert. Establishing supply depots at critical points allowed for an expanded radius of maneuver. The unit's autonomy gave them strategic freedom of action across vast territories. It was a true triumph of the elders' organizational skills. The psychological warfare waged by Huca demonstrated the power of covert pressure. Disorienting and wearing down his opponent became the most important tool in his arsenal. He knew how to impose his own rules of the game without engaging in direct contact. Managing the enemy's attention and fears required a deep understanding of human nature. The chief masterfully used the stranger's weaknesses against them. The Apache experience demonstrates how important it is to adapt strategy to specific conditions. What worked on the flat plains proved utterly useless in the mountains. Huca reimagined classic methods, creating a unique system of maneuvering. His unconventional thinking allowed him to find a way out of even the most hopeless situations. Mental flexibility became his primary weapon in defending his territories. Historical chronicles have preserved numerous admiring accounts of Apache tactics. Opponents acknowledged their unmatched mastery of camouflage and navigation. Respect for the enemy stemmed from an understanding of his supreme professionalism. Huca's actions struck fear even into the hearts of the most experienced military strategists. His legacy extended far beyond the harsh wastelands of the Wild West. Studying these methods provides a deeper understanding of indigenous cultures. For them, war was not an end in itself, but a means of preserving their way of life. Their tactics reflected their philosophy of harmony with the surrounding world and the elements. Every action was imbued with deep meaning and a careful calculation of consequences. It was a true intellectual game of survival in harsh conditions. Huca's strategy remains a striking example of the triumph of reason over circumstances. His legacy teaches us to value knowledge, discipline, and team cohesion. The memory of this outstanding leader lives on in research and documentary records. He proved that the proper deployment of forces can change the course of any conflict. The wisdom of this great strategist will forever remain in the history of indigenous peoples. Remembering the great strategists of the past compels us to view history differently. Chief Huca's ability to win without suffering any losses remains an unrivaled example of tactical genius. His legacy lives on in stories passed down from generation to generation. Please write in the comments what topics and stories about indigenous peoples you'd like to see in our next videos. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new historical episodes.